Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. It's Wednesday, the 5th of April, 2023. We have a very important subject to be considering this evening in relation to the indictment, the arrest even, of President Donald Trump. This is the very first time that a former U.S. president has faced criminal charges. And so it's incredibly significant. I'm Regan King. I'm joined as always by my good friend and co-host Simon Barrett. Welcome to tonight's program. Now, Simon, incredible event that's occurred here. Really strange in one way. For those of us who've been keeping up with U.S. politics for a few years, not in some other ways. What we have here is no short than cataclysmic. It's nothing less than cataclysmic for U.S. democracy, because what we're seeing is what appears to be a double standard in how various presidents are treated based on alleged crimes or alleged misdemeanors. It remains yet to be seen. At the time of recording, we don't know all of the charges that are being levied against Donald Trump. But what is clear is that there have been things of equal severity alleged against others who have been president, as well as our sitting president, Joe Biden, and nothing has been done in that regard. Whereas on this occasion, it seems like perhaps this is a political weapon being used against Trump to achieve a particular agenda for the Democrat Party. Individuals across Republican and Democrat spheres have expressed concern about this indictment. Individuals who have had fallings out with President Trump have expressed that they disagree with the indictment. Former Vice President Mike Pence himself saying that this was a tragedy, essentially. Asa Hutchinson, the governor of my former state, the state of Arkansas, while saying he believed Trump should back out of the race, whilst also inserting himself into the race, he indicated that it was a sad day for American politics and American democracy, and he himself, being formerly an individual in prosecution, would not have indicted Trump. What are your initial thoughts?
My initial thoughts is that we have to move as much as we can, take former President Donald Trump out of the picture and just purely look at the political process of what's actually happening. Yes, we know that President Trump, prior to him being president, there's a lot of question marks regarding his own personal morality and ethics. But I think this is more to do with the fact that what we're seeing really is the weaponization of America's legal system to be used as a political weapon to target anyone in opposition to the Democrats' agenda, which is namely globalism, and anyone who's standing in their way, they want to totally discredit. So anyone, for example, that's almost discrediting 50% of the American electorate who voted for Donald Trump at the last presidential elections in 2020. Those Americans that are patriotic, that love the Stars and Stripes, who hold dear to our Judeo-Christian values and want decency. They also want to better themselves economically and financially, and they want to be governed in a free country. And that's the big difference, I think, between Britain and the United States, is that there is so much freedom and liberty, or there was, in America in comparison to what we have in this country. And Americans treasure their freedom. This goes back to the whole concept of how the nation was actually born. It was born out of a struggle not to be dominated and controlled by a German king. This is why, increasing the taxes on the colony, that they wanted to be free, they wanted to be independent. They didn't like these heavy taxes being imposed on them, and this is, of course, why we had the Boston Tea Party episode where the tea was thrown overboard in the ports in Boston. But then also this relates to the fact of the manifest destiny of America, wanting to travel west across America to conquer America. And actually build one nation under God. So essentially what we're seeing here really is the use of law as a political weapon to target President Trump in order that he is either so discredited that he won't be able to stand or quits the race, or it's a warning to other future presidential candidates that if you oppose our agenda, this is what's going to happen to you. So it means that politics in the US in particular has now entered into a kind of very toxic arena. Prior to this, presidents were considered like monarchs in America and are untouchable. I mean, the previous president, President Nixon, in September of 1974, had faced the prospect of not only being impeached from office, but also the prospect of facing criminal charges. And yet he himself, those charges against him was dropped because Jerry Ford, the incoming president, gave him a presidential pardon. So this is the first time in over 274 years of US presidential history has an American president ever been indicted and facing criminal charges.
There are very significant consequences for the outcome of this case. It has been suggested that the Democrats may have an agenda in which they want Trump to win the nomination, banking on the hope that people will have so lost their taste for Trump that they will vote Biden in for a second term. That could actually backfire, and Trump could have 4 more years in the White House. But if he loses, he could have 4 years in the big house, as they call it in the States. He could actually see a prison sentence. I think that's unlikely, but it is very much on the table. Now, what exactly is going on here? Of course, at the time of our filming, at the time of recording, we don't know all of the charges, if there are any extra charges, but what we do know is in relation to particular expenses being looked at as hush money paid to the adult film star porn actress, basically Stormy Daniels or Stephanie Clifford, who he had an illicit relationship with, allegedly in a hotel room in Nevada in 2006, just months after his wife Melania gave birth to their son Barron. Now, anyone who's familiar with President Trump and has kept up with his comings and goings will recollect that this is not out of character. This is not something that would be completely outside of the realm of imagination at the time. Trump obviously would have been. He in that particular time would have been very much self-identifying as a Democrat. His being a Republican is actually only very recent. There's even still skepticism within the Republican Party as to whether or not he personally and truly holds to some of the policies that he presents on behalf of the Republican Party. But regardless, at the time, he had this relationship, probably wasn't even thinking about a presidential bid. That seems to have been a fairly off-the-cuff response to being made a mockery of by former President Barack Obama at a White House Correspondents' Dinner. But $130,000 US has allegedly been given to Stormy Daniels to buy her silence during his campaign in 2016 through his former lawyer, Michael Cohen. Now, okay, there's some problems with that. You can say if that happened, it's corrupt in any way. There's some corruption that's obviously there. But where does this come into the legal sphere? Why exactly is he being charged? According to the Sunday Times, the cover-up story started to unfold in January of 2018 when Wall Street Journal broke the story and the hush payments to Stormy Daniels. Federal prosecutors and the FBI opened an investigation where they claimed that Cohen had spent his own money to buy Daniels' silence. To buy silence, he had made an illegal contribution to the Trump presidential campaign. In August of 2018, Michael Cohen, Trump's personal lawyer, pleaded guilty to making an excessive campaign contribution for the purposes of influencing an election, and along with several other charges. He was then sentenced to a 3-year prison service at home for most of it because of the pandemic. But on the basis of that, you look at it and you can see why Trump has been named as a co-conspirator in this process. And it seems all the more likely that this Well, I personally look at this and think it's not going to go down particularly well for him because this has been cleared in court in the past in regard to Cohen. He was named as a co-conspirator. If it can be proven that Trump lied about the money and what it was used for, we can actually see some charges being upheld, I think.
Well, yeah, this is a long shot, though. I mean, don't forget the Democrats have spent 2 years since President, or almost 3 years now since President Trump has been out of office to go through his business dealings, go through his kind of presidency and trying to get mud on him that would actually stick legally. And this is what they've come up with. The US prosecutors didn't follow the case up with Stormy Daniels and the hush money when he was in office because they were prevented from doing so because President Trump was actually in office at the time. So therefore, this couldn't be pursued on a legal agenda. But we also have to realize as well that President Trump has faced two issues of indictment as US president. He was also then told that he was collaborated with Russian President Putin with the electioneering. That proved to be absolutely false, and this is what the former director of the FBI said. So there is definitely using the tools of the state to definitely punish, President Trump. I mean, we list all the misdemeanors and crimes committed by Joe Biden alone, US president. Then surely if the same criteria is applied to Donald Trump, it should be applied fairly to Joe Biden, to Barack Obama, to Bill Clinton, because they're all guilty of the same thing. We only have to look at, for example, how the Democrats influence Twitter in particular and Google and the social media giants together with the left-wing media to hush up the evidence found in Hunter Biden's laptop, for example, which was a huge scandal because it detailed the fact that it alleged that Joe Biden received direct money to his family on behalf of the Chinese government. And also the government in Ukraine, oligarchs in Ukraine, to pursue a particular agenda. So therefore, that you can say is electoral interfering because when anyone searched for the story of the Hunter Biden story, it came low on the search engine. And so therefore, the mainstream left-wing media in America didn't take this up as a story. So again, you can say that this had a direct impact upon American voters when they decided to go to the polls for the US presidential election in 2020. There's also, for example, Bill Clinton raising illegal campaign finance operation overseas. If he did that during the 90s, then he should also be facing criminal charges because that was against US law. And because it's Donald Trump, they want to target him. But the other side of this is that President Trump is using this trial that's taking place in New York today as of this recording means to bolster his position as the front runner for the Republican Party to become their candidate next year's presidential election against Joe Biden in 2024.
I was making the comment to someone recently that on one hand you can look at it and say that he's playing into the Democrats' hand, but also I feel the Democrats are playing into his hand to a degree because this only serves Trump's campaign well. As much as I have my issues and struggles with Donald Trump and his moral character, I've been very clear about that on these programs. At the same time, this sort of thing, especially where there's a sense of lack of fairness and lack of parity in the legal system that's being shown, when you see that clear corruption, people will look at it and say, okay, he's done this. Yeah, that's not great. That's not great. But they're coming and using that against Trump, not applying the same judgment to themselves on many cases, which you've rightly identified. And so people who have supported Trump in the past, first of all, they will always support Trump. They will always, MAGA supporters are MAGA supporters. They are always going to be in Trump's crew. But it's likely that the reaction or lack of reaction of other Republicans to this may swing more favor towards former President Donald Trump, which could actually see him not only win the nomination, but see him attract other potentially neutral or independent voters who are just fed up of the double standard with the Democrat Party, therein potentially gifting Trump the next election.
Well, that's the dangerous game that the Democrats are playing. But effectively, I think what this is wanting to silence anyone that is vocal and who opposes their agenda and their globalist agenda. I mean, we only have to look at President Trump's track record as US president. I mean, probably going down in the history as one of the most successful president in recent times, particularly you put him in the same league as your namesake, Ronald Reagan as well. I mean, he restored the US economy. It was in the doldrum for decades and rebuilt the US economy. He took America out of the international globalist agenda. He completely reinvented US foreign policy. I look at the success of the Abraham Accords. I even sat down and had a meeting with the leader of North Korea. And everyone thought that was impossible. He pushed back China as a threat. Money was running out for Islamic terrorist regimes like the Islamic Republic of Iran. Hezbollah, their terror-sponsored terror organization in the Middle East, was complaining that they were running out of money. And effectively, we had 4 years of comparative peace in the world because of Trump's dominance. Now, it doesn't mean that that's all Trump. It's pretty much his administration and the policies that they pursued. But the left always considered him non pro grata. Everything that he came up, they opposed. We've had daily media attacks on his character constantly and on his administration to give the impression that we have the equivalent of Hitler in power. And particularly when it came to January 6th, how this was presented as another 9/11 or another Pearl Harbor, everything that they could do to discredit him as much as possible so he doesn't ever go into the White House again is a huge part in this. So I think at stake is American liberty and American democracy.
A couple of things that immediately stand to mind in regard to the double standard. You had Trump really pushing for a withdrawal from Afghanistan, but with a clear timetable. And that was slated. There were individuals in the Democrat Party who were up in arms again about that and how he was doing that. Then Joe Biden comes along and does something times worse without any clear timetable that actually ended in the loss of more lives. There's that side of things where it's like, well, we'll oppose Trump just because he's Trump, just because he's saying something. You can see as well in regard to COVID and the COVID response. Joe Biden's COVID response, and a reminder, I'm wary that some viewers maybe that would be your primary hang-up with Trump, but he was very much pro getting a vaccination ready, getting it out there, and this was something that he was actually being condemned for by many leading Democrats, saying, no, it's too early, it's too soon, you can't do that without testing. Biden comes along right after Trump right after he is voted out, essentially. We see the product of it. Pfizer announces they're going to have their vaccination ready at some point. Biden and crew kind of take the glory of something that they were previously seemingly skeptical about. So you see there's a lot of double standards. It's the game of politics. It's a vile game in many ways. It's filled with corruption on both sides. But with that, here is a helpful news item from our friends at CBN speaking to us about Trump's indictment.
The indictment from the Manhattan grand jury makes Donald Trump the only current or former president ever to be charged with a crime. The investigation, led by Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, centers around an alleged $130,000 hush money payment to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. The payment allegedly made before the 2016 election over an alleged affair the former president denies. Trump responded in a lengthy statement that read in part, quote, "This is political persecution and election interference at the highest level in history," Trump's Vice President Mike Pence defended him on CNN shortly after the news broke.
I think the unprecedented indictment of a former president of the United States on a campaign finance issue is an outrage. And it appears to millions of Americans to be nothing more than a political prosecution.
Other Republicans rushed to Trump's defense and targeted the DA's motives.
It's duplicitous charging. They're trying to smear the guy. They're trying to take cases that nobody else would take and resurrect them. This is literally legal voodoo.
I think the Democrats know this has nothing to do with the law. They're sending a message, and the message is they will use any power that they have to interfere in the next presidential election.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy tweeting out a promise to hold Bragg accountable. Meanwhile, some Democrats preached patience. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer tweeting, "Mr. Trump is subject to the same laws as every American. There should be no outside political influence, intimidation, or interference in the case." The indictment remains sealed, meaning the exact charges are still unknown. The former president and the leading GOP candidate for 2024 is expected to turn himself in next week with an arraignment Tuesday. The New York Police Department is increasing security in anticipation of possible protests. Matt Gelka, CBN News.
Thanks, Matt. Here with us now is CBN News chief political analyst David Brody. David, the former president has already been fundraising off of the possibility of an arrest in this case. As we head into the 2024 race for the White House, is this indictment a gift to the Trump campaign?
Oh, it's the gift, and literally, Caitlin, it's the gift that keeps on giving. Look, Alvin Bragg may be Manhattan DA by title, but he is, in essence, turned into a de facto chief fundraiser for Donald J. Trump. He is the top fundraiser now for Donald J. Trump. And that mugshot, which we expect to be next Tuesday, will be plastered everywhere. And you can be sure that if you thought fundraising was big this week, wait until next week when that mugshot gets out. I have so much to say, Caitlin. You got to stop me. You know what? I need to filter myself. And I don't mean filter in a bad way. I just mean there's so much to say, but I'm sure you have a lot of other questions. But I think I've answered at least your initial question.
All right, let me redirect you a little bit. So we have a Democrat prosecutor charging a former Republican president. What are the implications of this for future presidents, Democrat or Republican?
Well, and this is the problem, right? I mean, this is the crux of the issue and why many Republicans, even ones that don't like Donald Trump, are coming to his defense because this is a dangerous road we're going down. Really? We're going to do tit for tat in the future? I mean, look at impeachment, Caitlin. I mean, impeachment, we know about the Russian witch hunt, as Donald Trump calls it, and we know about the Ukrainian phone call and all of that. Look, they went after Trump. They couldn't stand Trump. And now what? Now you see Republicans calling for Biden's impeachment over the border and X, Y, Z. I mean, where is this going exactly in our country? And I think that's the big problem. Look, Democrats, let's talk about the left for a second. It's not Democrats necessarily, but it's the left in this country. They have been obsessed with Donald Trump. And in the process, they think it's all about Donald Trump. It turns out this now becomes nothing about Donald Trump. He is a symbol at this point for the weaponization of the federal government. And it's not just, Caitlin, about Donald Trump. That's not what this is about anymore. What about the pro-lifers that have faced persecution under the FACE Act but from a Biden DOJ? What about the parents at school board meetings where the DOJ is coming after them and wanting questions answered? We can go down the list here. This is what this is all about at this point.
You mentioned that mugshot image. We know that President Trump will be arraigned next week. Does this mean he'll be taken away in handcuffs? How do you expect it to play out?
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see the handcuff shot. I think we will obviously see the mugshot. He will be fingerprinted. My sense is we understand this is going to be about 2:15 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday of next week. They'll figure out a way to most likely get him into the building without any sort of fanfare, though if Donald Trump wants it to be a different way, and you know Donald Trump and fanfare, he'd probably like the walk shot. He doesn't want the handcuff walk shot, but he wouldn't necessarily mind the actual walk shot without the handcuffs. We'll wait and see whether or not he goes with that, because it really is going to be up to him as to how much he wants to make this more of a spectacle than it already is. But I don't expect a walk shot, Caitlin. I expect a mug shot, and that's pretty much it.
And we have to say that this news item today, President Trump being indicted, facing criminal charges, is the first time that this has ever happened in US political history in over 274 years. No US president or former president has ever faced criminal charges. So we have to ask ourselves, really, what is the agenda behind this? Because, you know, as we've outlaid in this program before, that if we're going to have parity, then also, you know, we could put Joe Biden to get him to face criminal charges, certainly Bill Clinton, probably President Obama as well. So, you know, the list goes on. I mean, you could then probably say that you need to indict George W. Bush Jr. for the war in Iraq. So, you know, where does this stop? And previous presidents, unlike Trump, have never faced the prospect of facing criminal charges. So essentially, we are in new, dangerous political waters regarding the indictment of President Trump that is actually taking place today as we record this program on what is Tuesday, the 4th of April.
It's very easy when it comes to this story to think emotionally and to think to some degree with the lens of, is that right or is that wrong on a moral level, okay, and not to look at it according to the legal and democratic basis with which we have to approach this sort of story. Legally, it will be seen whether or not Trump did or did not do something illegal. That's why there's a particular case that's going. But you're exactly right in regard to the parity of it, and I do think that there is a definite political agenda that is going on here, as we can see particularly upon analysis of the district attorney Alvin Bragg. He's 49 years old, bringing the indictment against Trump. Bragg, the district attorney for Manhattan, began investigating Trump when he entered office in 2022. It was actually a pledge of his to do that prior. So this isn't a sudden moral campaign that he's thinking, okay, I'm unearthing this stuff, it's concerning. No one is above the law, so I'm taking it to President Trump. No, this was something he had already pledged to do. He's a veteran prosecutor and an elected Democrat in New York who despises Trump in the first instance. He's been very clear about that. Looking into Trump's business dealings and then taking up what was a cold case, the cold case of Stormy Daniels. According to the Gatestone Institute, in an article written by Elaine Deshay, Trump, the man to bring down Alvin Bragg, received a $1 million donation from the George Soros Foundation. Success against Trump depends on Michael Cohen, Trump's former lawyer, who is also out for revenge, and according to the Sunday Times, has met him now 20 times. So you can see that there are some angles going on here. There is opposition, definitely. There's some are calling it a witch hunt. And I want to reiterate, this is not a question of his moral character, which is questionable. This isn't about that. This is about the legal structure, the legal framework. Was something done that was illegal, that is worthy of a criminal charge being brought? I agree that no one is above the law, but that does work both ways. And it is interesting that there are several things that you can identify, that we can very quickly identify regarding Democrat politicians sitting at this present time, not having parity in how they're being treated. This has received condemnation from people who have issues with President Trump. You can go down the list of people who've been very condemning. I don't think former Vice President Mike Pence has had much contact with President Trump following the events at the Capitol and the January following the election. Pence was very condemning of some of Trump's behavior at the time, but even Mike Pence is saying in this particular event, in this particular occasion, that this was an outrage. He said the unprecedented indictment of a former president of the United States on campaign finance issue is an outrage. He spoke to CNN. It appears to millions of Americans to be nothing more than a political prosecution that's driven by a prosecutor who literally ran for office on a pledge to indict the former president. Asked then by CNN's Wolf Blitzer whether Trump should be disqualified from being in the 2024 presidential nominee race or drop out of the race, Pence said it's a long way to that decision.
Yeah, and I put a few more quotes into the mix as well. So Alan Dershowitz, who's a Harvard law professor, said this: in such a case, it's not a question of discovering the commission of a crime and then looking for the man who has committed it. It's a question of picking the man and then searching the law books or putting investigators to work to pin some sort of offense on him. Even the former US Attorney General William Barr, not known for his unquestionably support of Trump, called the indictment an abomination. They are going after a man and not a crime, Barr said. And Douglas Murray, writing in the Daily Telegraph, says that whenever people think of Trump, his former vice president is right. There is a considerable resentment over what many see as political prosecution or persecution. Even those Americans who have never been fans of the former president worry where exactly all of this leads. The indictment is unprecedented and it's almost certainly political. The New York District Attorney who has brought the case, Alvin Bragg, is a notorious leftist DA who has made it clear for a long time that building a case against the former president is more important than, for instance, tackling a rocketing crime in New York. He seems to have the beavering away particularly hard at this indictment ever since former colleagues of his claimed in the book that Bragg had dropped the ball on Trump. And according to Front Page magazine, now that he's been indicted, however, all those considerations must take a back seat to the fact that Donald Trump is the man whom the authoritarian left hates and fears more than anyone else, and who is determined to destroy. The leftist establishment also are avid to destroy Trump, that it has not hesitated to take a wrecking ball to the American trust in our most respected institution. So let's have a look at this CBN news video as former President Trump arrives in New York to face criminal charges and indictment.
He's gearing up for a battle.
Trump supporters lined the road leading up to his residence at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida, as he drove to the airport en route to New York City, where he plans to surrender to authorities on Tuesday.
This is something that obviously we believe is a political persecution, and he's someone who's going to be ready for this fight.
This is the first time in history a former president has ever faced criminal charges. While there are multiple investigations into Trump right now, this case involves hush money paid to adult film star Stormy Daniels before the 2016 election, who claims she had an affair with Trump while his wife was pregnant with his youngest son. Trump denies the affair and any wrongdoing. His attorney told ABC News he doesn't know what to expect this week.
This is unprecedented. I don't know. I've done a million arraignments in that courthouse with celebrities and whatnot, but this is a whole different thing. We have Secret Service involved. What I hope is that we get in and out of there as quickly as possible.
Police are setting up barricades in preparations for protests near the downtown Manhattan courthouse, where Trump will be arraigned, fingerprinted, and photographed Tuesday. This will be Trump's first court appearance facing a judge for this case, and his lawyers say he will plead not guilty. The indictment seems to be unifying the Republican Party.
This is dangerous.
With even potential 2024 rivals like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis coming to his defense.
They're trying to do all these legal gymnastics to try to act like it's a felony.
Former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, however, believes Trump should drop out of the 2024 race and announce plans to run against him.
The office is more important than any individual person. And so for the sake of the office of the presidency, I do think that's too much of a sideshow and distraction.
Legal experts warn this court battle could be slow and play out well beyond the 2024 presidential election. Trump will fly back to Mar-a-Lago after the arraignment scheduled for 2:15 p.m. Tuesday afternoon, and he plans to deliver a primetime address addressing.
And we're now joined on Behind the Headlines by Michael Shannon, who is a US political commentator and a strong conservative voice in the States. Michael, it's a great pleasure to have you on Behind the Headlines. What are your thoughts on the decision to indict the former US President Donald Trump?
Well, I have two thoughts: the indictment and the response. As Trump himself said, he issued a couple of tweets on whatever you call it on Truth Social. He called it an attack on our country, the likes of which has never been seen before. Never before in our nation's history has this been done, weaponizing the justice system to punishing a political opponent who just so happens to be a president of the United States and by far the leading Republican candidate for president. Has never happened before, ever. So I agree with that. And I think, well, none of the regime media, the mainstream media agrees with it, but conservative media, normal media, also agrees with it. So we're in complete agreement there.
And you said you had a second thought in regard to the response of it, particularly with the ordinary American voter. How do they see President Trump's indictment?
Well, their response, I think, is predictable and accurate. It is all these things. What I find astonishing is Trump's response. After the indictment was issued, a series of Trumpistas called for Ron DeSantis to do something. And so he did. He said he would not cooperate with the indictment. Now, I thought that was a little wishy-washy, I'll wash my hands of this. I thought he should have said, I will block extradition, not cooperate with it. So he's not going to cooperate with the extradition. So what does Trump do? Trump extradites himself like your average shoplifting suspect and goes to New York after issuing all these hyperbolic statements. It's like at Thermopylae, we only had 299 Spartans because Leonidas went to go talk to the Persians.
And Michael, what are your thoughts on what's being played out in this big political drama in the States? The first US president or former president ever to be indicted on criminal charges to face court in New York this afternoon as we record this program. Do you go along with what President Trump says, is that this is the Democrats weaponizing the legal system to make sure that anyone who opposes their globalist agenda are essentially assassinated or prevented for standing for office, like Trump wants to win the nomination for the Republican parties to stand as their candidate for the 2024 presidential election?
Once again, we have two elements here. One, you've got Trump derangement syndrome. They hate Trump so much, they're so crazy about the thought of Trump that they are violating all these norms, and they never think that it will come back to haunt them in the future. And so far, it hasn't come back to haunt them in the future. They get away with this because the only thing a Marxist understands is pain, and they never feel pain. What they are faced with after this is this bovine acceptance on the fact of conservatives who never do anything in response. The correct response now would be for red state attorneys general to start indicting Democrat politicians. And I've got a few I could name, but I don't know if that's going to happen. Then the other element is this, is this some greater plan on the part of the left to ensure that Trump gets the nomination? And in fact, I think that's what's going to happen. I think this just makes sure that he absorbs all the political bandwidth there is on the Republican Party, and then he gets the nomination, and then they figure he will lose in November, which I also think will happen.
Okay, and are you concerned that through this there's a direct threat against American democracy, fitting in with the reality that there does seem to be a double standard here in how some are treated on the Democrat side? What does this mean for the future of the American democracy?
It means that we are now officially in a two-tier justice system. And by that I mean we have one set of justice for friends and one set of justice for enemies. And Republicans, conservatives, non-regime supporters, white Christians in particular, are enemies. And so they get all the justice they can stand. Whereas friends of the regime get very little punishment, very little accountability. They are mostly free to do what they want to do.
Michael, according to several US conservative news outlets, I'll name one, the Gatestone Institute, they refer to the US District Attorney, he's a Democrat, Alvin Bragg, 49, who is prosecuting Trump in New York today, has received over $1 million in donations from the George Soros Foundation. What does this tell us about the true agenda behind this kangaroo court in New York?
Well, George Soros has an agenda, a political philosophy that he could not get through, I would say 95% of the legislative bodies in the United States. So, and he knows this. Soros is not stupid. He's extremely intelligent. He's just evil. And so what he does instead is he buys prosecutors and he elects prosecutors who won't enforce laws that he opposes, and who will bend the law. When they talk about bending the arc of history, well, this is bending the law to their predetermined outcomes, and it's extremely dangerous. Ron DeSantis in Florida is the only governor that I know of who has suspended one of these Soros prosecutors and removed him from power.
Okay, how do Democrats see this being played out with Trump? You mentioned a few minutes ago you suspected an agenda which seeks to see him receive the nomination, but then the Democrats will win. Do you think that's the reality of what's going to happen?
I do, because if this is such a big deal, why doesn't Trump act like it's a big deal? He talks to his supporters and he says, you've got to go to New York to protest, which is an invitation to be arrested. You can talk to the J6 political prisoners to find out what happens if you protest too vigorously in a blue area. And then does he fight it? Does he stay in Florida and fight the extradition? No, he meekly rides up in his plane to New York City and essentially cuts the legs out from under all his supporters. There are two Trumps. There is Tiger Trump, who says this is a terrible attack on American democracy, which is true. Then there is Paper Tiger Trump, who goes up there to be indicted and fingerprinted. And it's extremely frustrating that he continually does this. He's looking upon this, I think, mostly as he buys into any publicity is good publicity because it keeps his name before Republicans, and that it's a tremendous fundraising opportunity.
If this is playing into the Democrats' hands in some way, would it be a better solution for Trump to back down and say, I'm withdrawing my name from running on this occasion?
This is Donald Trump we're talking about?
Yeah. He won't do it, of course. But
There's no way that would ever happen.
Exactly.
Michael, finally, how can we as Christians across the other side of the Atlantic here in Britain be praying for former President Donald Trump, praying for this political process, and the forthcoming US presidential elections in 2024?
Two ways. One, pray for the Holy Spirit to give Donald Trump wisdom and discernment and the ability to listen. Because you know the Holy Spirit talks to you, but if you don't listen, it doesn't do much good. And then the other thing is we need to pray for these leftist politicians that the Lord will soften their heart and that they will turn away from their heresy and their apostasy and their demonic, literal demonic influences, and come back to Christ. So there's two sets of people here we really need to pray for.
Michael, we just really appreciate the excellent work you do, and thank you so much for joining us from Arkansas today in the States and your views on the indictment of former US President Donald Trump.
Thank you, Simon. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks to Michael Shannon for joining us with his perspective on this important program. Simon, what do you make of it?
Well, I think this is very disturbing. And what makes this so disturbing really is the fact that the Democrats under Joe Biden are using the institutions of the state in order to bring and attack their political opponents. Because I think either one of two things and two scenarios come to mind. The first thing is they want to discredit President Trump as much as possible to discourage him from standing in the 2024 presidential elections next year, next November. Or the other thing is that they want to give and propel President Trump into the limelight so that he succeeds in winning the Republican nomination as president, in which they think they can defeat him in the polls come November 2024. But the great danger is in this one is the level of political divide now between the Democrats and the Republicans. It is nothing short of absolute hatred. And we had an example of this, I think, last September when we recorded a Behind the Headlines, when we unpacked Joe Biden's very dystopian speech that he made, warning about the dangers of MAGA Republicans and how they pose the greatest threat to the Republic. And how that these are the real enemies. Forget the emergence of totalitarian China or the Iranian regime on the verge of nuclear weapons being controlled by Islamic fundamentalists, or President Putin, who's completely out of control in Russia, posing a threat to Western security and also the kind of security of the Ukraine, threatening nuclear weapons. No, the biggest threat comes from Americans themselves. That is the game changer, I think, in all of this. And it's doing everything to discredit and attack anyone who stands politically in the way of the globalist agenda being pursued by Biden and the Democrats. I think this is the new dangerous world that we've now entered. And what does this mean now? Does this mean that the Republicans then can start taking Bill Clinton or Joe Biden or even former President Obama to court for crimes committed in office? Where does it stop? This is the question. I mean, effectively, we're seeing the destruction of American democracy and the destruction of American institutions, and having them being turned into kind of weapons against Trump's and against the MAGA Republicans, including the FBI.
Yeah, and it's a shame, Simon. We can look back, many of us can look back even prior to 2016 and seeing this. Trump's character is polarizing. Trump's perspective is polarizing, and so his presentation of himself through the campaign, you knew that even if he was voted out after 4 years, that he wouldn't go away. This wouldn't go away. His influence, for good or ill, would have a massive ripple effect. Thankfully, there's been some really good things that have been achieved as a result of Trump's tenure. And there's also been some things like this that wouldn't have happened were it not Trump, were he to have helped himself out a little bit, a little bit more. But, you know, again, on the subject of parity, it's important that we do remember the areas of concern that equally reflect back on the Democrats. So the Republicans, yes, they're guilty of some things. There's some corruption that's there. There are issues that we can highlight this. The Democrats also, and historically you can see even more so to a large degree. Remember in 2016, all of the polls everywhere, really around the world, were predicting a massive loss for President Trump. There were some of us, though, who felt this just doesn't seem right. This doesn't seem like it's going to be quite on that level. If there is a loss, not in as much as people think there is. And so when he won, it came as a massive surprise and a massive shock to many people who were just judging things based on the polls. And essentially, there were some who almost certainly vowed this can't happen again. At the beginning of Trump's term of office, the FBI mounted a campaign against National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, who was then forced to resign. An endless saga of Russian collusion claims came up. Throughout Trump's tenure, there was this constant attack against him for potential interference, election fraud. And then what's curious is when we come to the 2020 presidential election, when Republicans express concerns in the same way, they are spoken of as extremists, or their concerns, legitimate or not, it doesn't matter, are pushed away completely. And they're labeled as conspiracy theorists or crazy, essentially treated as if they're worthy of being put in some sort of mental health institution for suggesting that there might be some election interference, when for the better part of 4 years, the Democrats were doing the exact same thing. In every moment, seeking to undermine Trump, seeking to undermine his decisions. And we couldn't appoint someone to the Supreme Court without having a target drawn on them, and dirt being thrown, mud being slung. Who can forget Brett Kavanaugh? I believe you and I discussed that fairly early on in my coming on Revelation TV, that this scandal really that. Okay, eventually you see he was cleared and he was able to take office, but slander sticks around for a long time. You can't actually stop the harm that words can do. And so there's not been parity. There's not been equal or fair treatment that has approached both sides in the same way.
Yeah, do you want to explain the case a little bit regarding, let me find my notes, Douglas Mackey, for example, which is very alarming. So I'll just tell you about this one. American commentators are fearing that America now faces a two-tier justice system that applies to every American citizen, not just to the big names. So on Friday last week, a 33-year-old Trump supporter named Douglas Mackey was convicted of election interference and faces up to 10 years in prison for tweeting a pro-Trump memes during the 2016 election. And according to Friday's press release from the Justice Department, Mackey faces up to 10 years in prison for this. Vaughan tweeted a photo of what looked like a Hillary ad, but was actually a parody of a Hillary ad. The caption read, "Avoid the line, vote from home, text Hillary to 59925, vote for Hillary and be a part of history."
Yeah, and the Justice Unless You Support Trump Department explained that this was a heinous crime because Mackey conspired with other influential Twitter users and with members of private online groups to use social media platforms, including Twitter, to disseminate fraudulent messages that encourage supporters of presidential candidate Hillary Clinton to vote via text message or social media, which in reality was legally invalid. And all of that does sound pretty messed up. It sounds terrible. If it was meant to be taken seriously in the first place, it was never meant to be taken seriously. It was a standard, one can argue in poor taste or unwise, election day joke. I've seen it here where people say, if you vote this, remember your voting day is tomorrow, and if you vote that, you go the next day. That's your day to vote, just so they miss actual election day. A friend had his post taken down for making a joke that he thought everyone knew was a joke. He's not in prison for it. This guy's done basically the same thing. What's more, so the Justice Department, according to the post-millennial publication, was unable to provide evidence that anyone was deceived by the meme. What's more, at least one memester on the other side did the same thing and was never arrested or tried and faces no prison time. Again, it's a fairly standard election day joke. Unwise, probably, a bit immature, almost definitely, but it's a fairly standard Election Day a joke. On November 8th of 2016, which was Election Day, Christina Wong tweeted a video of a Trump supporter with the caption, "Hey, Trump supporters, get poll lines at #election2016 and text in your vote. Text votes are legit. Or vote tomorrow on Super Wednesday." And not only was Christina Wong never prosecuted, but her tweet is still live. So there's definitely a double standard there. And this indictment of Donald Trump places America decisively on this path toward becoming an authoritarian regime in which dissent is forbidden, the opposition is a sham that's run by people in power, and those who oppose the elites are arrested, they're tried, they're imprisoned on even the flimsiest of pretext. Now, again, we will see what happens. We'll see what happens with this. We need to see, there's apparently 30 charges that are being levied against President Trump. It will be interesting to see the content of those charges. Will he be innocent or guilty?
We're running out of time, but wouldn't you say the fact that the Attorney General that is bringing the prosecution against Trump, Bragg, the fact that he's received over $1 million in donations from the George Soros Fund, isn't that election interfering? Particularly as we're heading into this crucial election in 2024 that will determine not only the future direction of the United States, but also the future direction of the free world.
If our transgressions were all counted, who would stand? This is the thing. We have to recognize at the end of this all, it is essential that we pray for the United States, that we pray for its peace, that we pray for justice wherever that falls, for both sides of the equation.
Regan, it's great to be joining you on Behind the Headlines today, and thank you for watching at home. We're in real danger that that liberty of freedom that we've enjoyed for centuries now is starting to go out. If the light goes out in America, it'll go out across the world, and that's why as Christians it's imperative that we pray for the US political system, we pray for freedom, and we speak up for righteousness in Jesus' name. So thank you for watching tonight's edition of